For everyone who is just tuning in, I'm with brother Shawn D Rochester. Shawn is a very smart man, as you can see from this interview, and he's written a book called The Black Tax, The Cost of Being Black in America, and he lays out just the different ways in which, as Black Americans, we are taxed, whether it be through, real estate or auto insurance or online marketplaces or whatever. That we're being taxed, in which that tax reduces our cash flow to invest in other things that can start building wealth for our community. So we've talked about the P portion of his Ph.D. model, which stands for purchasing. Now let's get into the hiring piece. But before we do, please make sure that if you like this video, press the thumbs up button on YouTube. And so we can bring more videos like this to you later on. And we have about 228 people watching, so that's a great number. I'm glad so many of you guys are interested in this this subject. But back to Shawn. And Shawn, can we talk about the H portion of your model? So what's going on with hiring, and why is that important to the Black community?
So as you said, the H stands for hiring, right? And in simple terms is, are we represented proportionally on the payrolls of companies in general, right? It is super critical because each of those things represents, a job in our community. There are many companies in which we play a substantial role or impact on their incremental revenues and their incremental profit, but we're not well represented on their payroll. For example, across the tech industry, right, which represents some of the most highly paid, high growth, super critical, long lasting jobs. When you think about on a go forward basis, we tend to be around 2% level. And what I talk about in the book, and you'll see showing up here in terms of, and everywhere, is this 2% paradigm, which is in areas that are critical for wealth accumulation for Black people, we tend to hover at around 2% representation. Right? You're going to see this number coming up again and again. So the issue is, are we represented on the payroll? And what you will often get is you'll often get a representation of how well they are doing or not doing when it comes to their minority population, right? Their non-white population or their kind of non-white male population. I think those are good numbers to know and to understand, but always buried in there are the Black numbers, which tend to be horrific, whether you're talking about the financial services industry in terms of being in leadership positions, right, across there, you're talking about less than 2%. When you're talking about, the media industries, right, it winds up being kind of across the board. Are we represented on the payroll, right? So if the payroll is $800 million, how much of that is going to Black employees there? It is super critical. And again, this goes back to what I'm talking about in terms of being specific, right? Because people will represent and they'll share kind of how they're doing from a minority standpoint, which is great in terms of progress that they've made on that. But we don't see the same gains when it comes to Black representation, because Black people in America tend to have very consistently the highest bias levels against us, right? And wealth and capital and resources tend to flow through the path of least discrimination. Right? So it's super, super critical. And it pretty much parallels what you see when it comes to the purchase end of it, right?
Yeah. And, I want to talk about specificity. Sorry, I can't say that word very well. But being specific in regards to two dimensions, though, right? So one is, how many dollars are you spending with, Black businesses or on, Black payroll? Not minority, but just specifically on the Black side of it. Exactly, but then you can look at it in terms of leadership levels too, in terms of who you hire to make those decisions. So if you're spending, let's say you're still spending 20% on Black payroll, which no company is doing, or no major company is doing. But if all of those individuals are low skilled laborers and no one in upper senior management, will our community still see the benefit that a senior leader brings to the table in terms of advocating for policy and advocating for certain deals to be done? So I think you need to look at it at both dimensions in terms of, minority versus Black, but then also the dimension of where on the totem pole is this person, your company that you're hiring? Because, a fast food company could, theoretically say we have, thousands of Black employees, but they may only have one or two senior leaders. or even mid-level leaders in the entire organization. And I think that's a challenge, a problem that we have to look at as well.
Yep. So you bring up a great problem, right? A great issue, which is not only to what extent are we represented on payroll, but where are we in terms of responsibility and leadership positions, right? Where are we on that totem? And this is critical. But even when people are placed on the totem, it is what environment are they operating in, and how does that affect their ability to advocate to have more of us present, right? Otherwise, you wind up with this tokenism. And the challenge with that is that research says that when you have Black people that are one of very few in a particular role, and this winds up being the case for other groups as well, it's very difficult to advocate for more in-group to be present. Why is that? One, the institution organization has made it pretty plain because you're one of a few, and that's been the case for a long time, right? So the perception is, so researchers say that they're dealing with a double problem. First problem is, if I see somebody who is pretty amazing, that might be a competitor to me now, right? So maybe I don't want to advocate as strongly. If I see someone that I perceive is weak, well, I might not want to advocate for that person, because if they don't do well, then it kind of reflects on me. So you're in this strange kind of catch-22 situation, right? The other issue is if I'm advocating for someone who is Black, just like me, I could look like I am being biased towards Black people. I'm only doing it because it's a Black person, right? The other thing that research says is that people actually don't receive a benefit for doing diversity enhancing behavior. And what they mean by that is the hiring and promoting of Black people, right? In general, there is no benefit perceived to it across, executives. There is, in general, some cost to it, which is those people who do that tend to be rated more poorly when it comes to their review. So there's a cost to it. The only category of people that do not bear a cost are white males, right? So we also have to be cognizant that the panacea isn't to have a person in a role that doesn't have an environment that is supportive and conducive, right, to continuing to do that. If not, we're going to be faced with these situations of why are there so few, and how come we don't see more advocacy for us amongst us, which tends to be an issue. And I think it's important that decision makers and policymakers understand that, so they can start to build solutions around it to circumvent some of those issues that we're dealing with. But I'm completely with you.
Yeah, no, and